Hello from the Channel studio in London and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches, the programme that takes you around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Tenyola Oyetayo. On the programme this week, Nottingham City in the United Kingdom left shaken by a series of attacks which left 3 people dead. Plus, former US President Donald Trump appears in court for a second time amid allegations he mishandled classified files. We begin in the United Kingdom, where Nottingham residents woke up on Tuesday to discover their city had been transformed into a major crime scene during a series of violent attacks in the early hours in which both a knife and van were used as weapons. 3 people were killed and another 3 were injured. Tributes have been pouring in for the victims, 2 of which were students studying at Nottingham University. The major operation, which led to many roads across Nottingham being closed, began after police were called to a report of 2 people being stabbed and left unresponsive on a road in the city centre at about 4 a.m. Both victims were 19-year-old University of Nottingham students. Officers were then alerted to another incident not far away, where someone driving a van had tried to run over 3 people, leaving 1 man in a critical condition in hospital, while the other 2 suffered minor injuries. Another man in his 50s was then found dead from knife injuries shortly afterwards on a road about 2 miles from the first incident.
Police were called to Wilkeston Road just after 4 a.m. after a member of the public reported that 2 people aged 19 had been stabbed and were unresponsive. We had a further call to another incident in Milton Street, where the driver of a stolen van had attempted to run over 3 people. As a result, 1 man is in hospital in a critical condition, while 2 others are believed to have suffered minor injuries. The van was then stopped on Maple Street, where a man was tasered and detained by police officers on suspicion of murder. A man in his 50s was also found dead from knife injuries in Magdala Road by a member of the public. At the moment, we believe that the suspect has stolen this man's vehicle and driven it to Milton Street, where he is then driven at members of the public.
On Tuesday, detectives said they had an open mind about the motive for the linked incidents, adding that counter-terrorism officers were working on the investigation. An eyewitness said she felt shaken after seeing a driver run his van into pedestrians in the central English city.
5:30, I was going to work and a white van pulled up beside me and I thought, oh, that's weird. So I looked.
This was at the Theatre Royal, just at the corner there?
Yeah, just on the corner. And he looked in his mirror, saw a police car behind him. He then quickened up. There was 2 people turning the corner. He went straight in to these 2 people. The woman went on the curb. The man went up in the air. It was such a bang. I wish I never saw it, because it's really shaken me up. The woman was sitting up on the curb. She looked okay. The man was laying down, but then he got up. Sat him on the side, waiting for an ambulance. But I just can't believe he was able to get up after the head wound.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak thanked the police and emergency services for their response to the incident in Nottingham and said police must be given the time to do their work.
Listen, I don't have
A vigil was held at St. Peter's Church in the city, where people lit candles and left flowers for the victims. The flag on Nottingham's council house has been lowered to half-mast and a book of condolence opened. The UK government's management of the COVID-19 pandemic has come under scrutiny this week, with a focus on the country's high death toll compared to other countries in Europe. The public inquiry comes as former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who led the government when the pandemic broke out, is under investigation over whether he may have misled Parliament over alleged breaches of lockdown rules in Downing Street. As the UK's inquiry into the government's handling of coronavirus started its main hearings, families who lost loved ones during the COVID-19 pandemic held a demonstration. Dozens of protesters wearing red clothes to mirror the red hearts on the COVID memorial wall stood outside Dorland House in London, holding photographs of their family members who died during the pandemic.
This inquiry will come to hear that the United Kingdom was not prepared, that the capacity of the UK to cope with COVID was diminished by years of underfunding, cuts and the impact of Brexit. According to the National Records of Scotland, as of the 4th of June 2023, there were 17,646 deaths in Scotland, where COVID-19 was mentioned on the death certificate. Each of those deaths not only represents an individual tragedy, but has affected the friends and family, the loved ones of each of those who died. Today, it is over 3 years since the first death from COVID-19 took place in this country. In that time, nearly 250,000 people have died from COVID, as our leaders stand accused of presiding over a carousel of chaos. Those who lost loved ones will no longer be invisible in their misery, and it is for this inquiry to illuminate the truth.
Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson had ordered the inquiry to look into the United Kingdom's preparedness, as well as the public health and economic response, after Britain recorded one of the world's highest death tolls from COVID. More than 175,000 deaths from the virus had been reported by the time Boris Johnson stood down in July last year. In total, 227,321 people have died in the UK with COVID on their death certificate.
I have promised many times that those who suffered hardship and loss are and will always be at the heart of the inquiry. And I have done my very best within the constraints upon me of time, resources and my terms of reference to fulfil that promise. I know that there are those who feel that the inquiry has not sufficiently recognised their loss or listened to them in the way that they feel appropriate. But I hope that they will better understand, as the inquiry progresses, the very difficult balance I have had to strike. I hope they will understand, when they see the results of the work we are doing, that I am listening to them. Their loss will be recognised.
The inquiry has held preliminary hearings, but this week saw the first evidence heard in the inquiry since it was formally launched in June 2022. With a national election expected next year, the detailed examination of decision-making could create political headaches for current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who was Finance Minister during the pandemic. However, evidence hearings, which covers governance and decision-making in the pandemic, are not due to start until later in the year. The government has launched a legal challenge against the inquiry over its request for internal government WhatsApp messages from Johnson's time in office, which it says are irrelevant to the investigation. And over in the United States, former President Donald Trump pleaded not guilty to 37 charges in a brief but historic court appearance following his arrest and processing on federal charges. He's the first former president to face federal charges following last week's indictment amid allegations he mishandled classified files. The 77-year-old, who is running for president again in 2024, has branded the federal case as politically motivated, accusing President Joe Biden of attempting to derail his candidacy. Former President Donald Trump sat in a courtroom on Tuesday to face charges against him for the second time in a little over 2 months. He pleaded not guilty to 37 criminal charges that he unlawfully kept national security documents when he left office and lied to officials who sought to recover them. There was heavy police presence outside the courthouse, where several dozen protesters held banners and chanted in support of and against Trump, at times arguing loudly with each other.
Trump's a dick! Yes, he is! Trump's a dick!
I think that people should get educated that when you're the president, you are allowed. It is your duty to, as soon as it's in your hand, it's declassified. If you say declassified. Come on, it's just, they don't want him to run again. They don't want him to run again. That's all.
Nothing's going to happen. This is a big joke. This is a circus. The judge that's appointed, he appointed her. What do you think is going to happen? Come on. The worst, a slap on the face, maybe house arrest. Let's hope it's not the White House.
In court, wearing a blue suit and a red tie, Mr. Trump did not speak during the 47-minute hearing, which was closed to cameras. It was a contrast to later in the afternoon, when he appeared more spirited as he met with supporters who sang happy birthday to the former U.S. president.
Happy birthday to you!
Trump, who turned 77 on Wednesday, was allowed to leave court without any restrictions to domestic or international travel. No cash bond was required, and the judge in the case also ruled that he was not allowed to communicate with potential witnesses. The Republican later traveled to his golf club in New Jersey, where he addressed supporters.
Threatening me with 400 years in prison for possessing my own presidential papers, which just about every other president has done, is one of the most outrageous and vicious legal theories ever put forward in an American court of law. The Espionage Act has been used to go after traitors and spies. It has nothing to do with a former president legally keeping his own documents. As president, the law that applies to this case is not the Espionage Act, but very simply the Presidential Records Act, which is not even mentioned in this ridiculous 44-page indictment. Under the Presidential Records Act, which is civil, not criminal, I had every right to have these documents. In other words, whatever documents a president decides to take with him, he has the right to do so. It's an absolute right. This is the law. And that is something that people have now seen, and it couldn't be more clear. They ought to drop this case immediately because they're destroying the country. And this is why no other president, even those who kept far more documents than I, has ever been even investigated, let alone charged with a crime. Because the sham indictment put forward by the Biden administration included staged photographs of boxes at Mar-a-Lago, many people have asked me why I had these boxes. Why did you want them? The answer, in addition to having every right under the Presidential Records Act, is that these boxes were containing all types of personal belongings, many, many things.
He has repeatedly proclaimed his innocence and accuses Democratic President Joe Biden's administration of targeting him.
I will appoint a real special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, Joe Biden, and the entire Biden crime family. Name a special prosecutor. And all others involved with the destruction of our elections, our borders, and our country itself. They're destroying our country. And when I'm reelected, and we will get reelected, we have no choice. We're not going to have a country anymore. I will totally obliterate the deep state. We will obliterate the deep state. And we know who they are. I know exactly who they are. They want to take away my freedom because I will never let them take away your freedom. It's very simple. They want to silence me because I will never let them silence you. They want you silent. And I am the only one that can save this nation because you know they're not coming after me, they're coming after you, and I just happen to be standing in their way, and I will never be moving. On November 5th, 2024, justice will be done. We will take back our country, and we will make America great again.
This sets up a long legal battle as Donald Trump, the frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination, campaigns to win back the presidency in November 2024. Trump's spokesperson and lawyer says the prosecution by the Justice Department is politically motivated. Special counsel Jack Smith, who is handling the case, accuses Trump of risking national secrets by taking thousands of sensitive papers with him when he left the White House in January 2021 and storing them in a haphazard manner at his Mar-a-Lago, Florida estate and his New Jersey golf club. Photos included in a grand jury indictment released last week showed boxes of documents stored on a ballroom stage in a bathroom and strewn across a storage room floor. Those records included information about the secretive U.S. nuclear program and potential vulnerabilities in the event of an attack. Where Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment, Ukrainian civilians in Kherson face new threats amid flood disaster. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. The mass flooding from the destruction of the Novakakhovka Dam in Ukraine has drowned cities and brought new threats of homelessness, disease, and even warning of floating landmines. The Red Cross is warning that landmines uprooted and dispersed by floodwaters surging downstream from the breached dam could pose a grave danger to civilians for decades to come.
For Irana Redetska and other Kherson residents, they've endured Russian occupation, shelling after Ukrainian forces retook the city, and now flooding. Redetska, a deputy head teacher, says her school was hit by shelling the day before the latest tragedy to hit Kherson. Last week, the Kakhovka Dam was destroyed, submerging the city and nearby villages. Kyiv and Moscow have blamed each other for damaging the dam.
They say a new love kills the old one. Maybe it's the same with tragedy. A new tragedy silences the old. We hadn't even had time to process the shelling at the school when another tragedy with the dam struck.
These days, Irana's school teaches only online due to the risk of shelling. Of the approximately 1,400 children registered at her school, just over 100 are still in the Kherson region. Leonid Remya is a chief doctor at one of Kherson's hospitals. He says there was a huge flow of people into the facility after the dam burst on Monday, June the 5th.
On the first day, we admitted 136 people, 22 of whom had mobility problems, most of them relying on wheelchairs. They were all in a state of stress. Most of them were brought in wearing wet clothes and nothing else.
Few places have felt the extent of suffering that Kherson has since Russia invaded Ukraine in February last year. The city, which has a peacetime population of 280,000, was occupied by Russian forces on March the 2nd, 2022. It was liberated by Ukrainian troops in early November, but since then has been regularly shelled by Russian forces from the east side of the Dnipro River. Alongside flooding, the Red Cross is warning that one particular side effect of the dam disaster could pose an incredible danger to civilians even decades from now. Unexploded landmines and other munitions that have been swept away by the flood and now could literally be anywhere.
Mines can, depending on their shape and what they're made of, can float for kilometers downstream. Particularly plastic-bodied mines can float longer, and that's a major concern now these days. The risk would be worse when the water resides, because debris will be covering potentially the mines, so you can't see them. So this is why we are extremely worried about the situation. I should also say that many people think that a mine that has been underwater is less likely to function, but experience we have in the International Committee of the Red Cross shows that even mines from World War II that was laid in 1942 to 1945 that have been under seawater for all this time, so more than 70 years, are still capable of functioning.
Evacuations from the flood are ongoing, but the fighting around it hasn't stopped. Ukrainian authorities said on Thursday that a civilian was killed and several others wounded during what they called targeted strikes by Russian shelling in one of the cities hit by the flood, Kherson. Russia also accuses Ukraine of shelling rescue workers in parts of the region that it occupies. Meanwhile, the International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael visited Ukraine on Tuesday to check the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant after the water level of a reservoir that offers cooling water for it dropped sharply as a result of the dam damage. Despite the hardship Ukrainians living near the frontline face, residents like Irina and Leonid are convinced that the city of Kherson will recover and thrive. But for now, the struggle continues.
Meanwhile, Russia's invasion has thrown up huge challenges for Ukraine's coal mines, from the danger posed by airstrikes to the departure of miners off to the front to fight. Russia's attacks on Ukraine's nuclear, thermal and other power stations continue to disrupt electricity service as the war grinds on for a second year.
Even underground, there is no escaping Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The conflict has thrown up huge new problems for the country's coal mines, from miners leaving to fight to airstrikes on facilities. But the mines keep running in what operators see as an act of defiance that is vital to the war effort. Viktor is chief engineer at one mine in eastern Ukraine. For him, an already hazardous job that has been made a whole lot more risky.
We are faced with new challenges, new problems that have arisen in our production flow. This includes difficulty with the supply of equipment. Another challenge is people who have left, as well as our newcomers. There are problems caused by missile attacks that lead to power outages. Last year, there were several times when we had to stop production.
Victor says that more than 400 workers have been mobilized since fighting began last year. Some have since been replaced by other workers, including people displaced by war. The mine has also faced missile strikes and problems with supplies. Miner Andriy was displaced by war. He says the fighting has become all too close.
Well, as they say, the war has come here too. During one of the shifts when we were working underground, there was a hit on the power plant and the mine lost power, and we had to go out through emergency exits. There was no power inside the mine. We had to get out through the emergency exits.
Ukrainian officials say coal is central to meeting Ukraine's energy needs following the Russian military's campaign to destroy power stations and other infrastructure. Before the war, the Ukrainian government planned to reduce the country's reliance on coal-fired power stations, which contribute to global warming, and to increase nuclear energy and natural gas production.
Finally on the program, Palestinian artists have created an art exhibition called Occupation Kills Childhood from the rubble of houses destroyed by Israeli strikes during the conflicts in the central Gaza Strip.
On one wall, the artist depicts a woman holding her son. On another, a boy painted with tears in his eyes. A third shows a girl seen through a mirror combing her hair. Piles of rubble still encircle the houses in the Palestinian town of Deir al-Balah. Parts of exploded Israeli missiles were placed on tables for display.
Out of suffering, pain, and siege, we derive hope, art, and victory. We drew on the rubble so we can get the message through using a brush and color.
Our goal and message is to show the world that from the midst of rubble and destruction, we can deliver a message through artistic paintings that express our people's suffering. We want to convey to the whole world a message that the Palestinian people have the right to be like any other people around the world.
Gaza, home to 2.3 million people enrolled by Islamist group Hamas, is blockaded by Israel and Egypt. In May, Israel launched a campaign against commanders of the Islamic Jihad militant group, which said had planned attacks in Israel. In response, the Iranian-backed group fired more than 1,000 rockets, sending Israelis fleeing into bomb shelters. Israel killed 6 senior Islamic Jihad commanders and said it destroyed a number of military installations. 15 Palestinian civilians, including women and children, were also killed, according to Palestinian health officials. In Israel, 2 people, an Israeli woman and a Palestinian laborer, were killed by Palestinian rockets fired in Israel.
This image is in the same place where my children were present, where they used to play. Thank God they weren't hurt in the attack, but unfortunately, this place has now turned into a war zone.
This is the worst wave of violence in the Gaza Strip since August last year, when about 50 Palestinians were killed in Israel's raids that lasted for 3 days. Israel and Hamas have fought 4 wars since the Islamic militant group seized control of Gaza in 2007. Gaza's population has next to no freedom of movement, and healthcare, electricity and sanitation and other crucial infrastructure have all been collapsed in the 16 years since Israel and Egypt imposed a strict blockade after the Hamas takeover.
And that's the program today, but remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Tenyola Oyetayo. Bye for now.